So we were messing around with managed connections and having a lot of fun. And I try to do a little bit at the end there where it's more than just managed connections. You need to make sure that you take advantage of all the amenities when you're at a nice resort. So what did we do yesterday? Well, we took an 18.2 web app that used an existing SQL databases, 2 of them. And it could have been any prior revision. I just happen to have 18.2. And we migrated it to 19.0 and used the dashboard to set it up as the new web app name and the new virtual directory on a new specified website. So we used a new feature of 19.0 right off the bat. It automatically added a table for server properties. And we now had the ability to use a second new feature of 19.0 right off the bat. At that point in time, I could have stopped, gone in, and if I'd known enough how to do it, set up some web properties to be server-side and done nothing more than just started using server-side web properties at that point. So, I'm talking about managed connections, but it's really getting advantage of everything that's in 19.0. Then we added some code for the managed connection. You remember that, it took me half an hour, 45 minutes to write all that code. Oh yeah, it was 4 lines, 3 lines. We added that code for the managed connection and compiled it, and even though we weren't using managed connections, it didn't break anything. That was a bonus. Then we added a managed connection. That was good. And then we took that server property table that was added, that was still an embedded database, and converted it, and it even made an adjustment for it since it knew we were going to SQL, so more yet new features. Then we repaired the existing SQL connections to be managed connections, repaired being the operative word. That's what we used to do that. Then we added an additional managed connection for that table that was from the other database and repaired it. And we added an alternate managed connection. So we now had 2 managed connections, an additional one. We had some tables over here, some tables over there. Then we added that alternative managed connection that was the same data, but accessed a different way. It wasn't using a trusted connection. It was using a login. And then we even found out that we couldn't log in because we hadn't created that onerous login utility. And so, we spent the next half hour, 45 minutes doing that. And now we were using credentialed access with encrypted passwords. And we did all of that in 23, 25 minutes. So that's where we left it off. Oops, I got to go back. So what didn't we do? What did I wish I had 5 more minutes to show you at the end? And it's like, okay, now that we're there, because remember, we could have not started with an SQL app. We could have started with an embedded database app. And then that one step where I converted the one table from embedded to SQL would have been just a larger step because I would have converted all my tables. And maybe I would have converted some of them to one database and some of them to another, depending upon what my app needed. But it would have been just, that one step would have been a little bit more encompassing. But what we could have done is said, okay, well now we're in SQL, what should we really start doing to take better advantage of now that we're there? Because there's so much that you can do. The first thing we have to kind of stop and realize is, what are we doing? Are we taking our embedded app to SQL because some of our customers are going to be using SQL and we really don't want to have any divergent code, so we're just going to kind of get it there and leave it there? That's fine. If that's what your business model dictates is smart for you, that's not a bad thing. You convert, you don't mess with the app, so now you have the same code base. You can use it embedded, you can use it as Microsoft SQL Server, whatever you want. But if what you're really going to do is kind of move to SQL and kind of leave the embedded database behind, now you want to start doing more. You want to start doing the things that are going to really unlock the power of the new environment that you're in. So you want to hit the low-hanging fruit first. One of the things that's the lowest hanging is identity columns. How many people have DataFlex apps where you are serving the next blah, blah, blah number out of a system file? Raise your hands. A lot of you. That's just the way it was done. So one of the first things you want to do is maybe not do that anymore, because it really kind of, it's wasteful. First of all, that system file becomes a choke point. Second of all, SQL Server knows how to serve up next numbers automatically all by itself. Why not let it do the work so that you don't have to make round trips to the client? So we can just go and look at that real quick. And here's this is back where I left that application. And if you look, what happened to my mouse? There it is. If you look at the order sys file, you can see that we have order number, customer number, and vendor number that are all being served out of that file. So let's say we don't want to do that anymore. What do? We can open up the customer. We can go to customer number. We can come down here. And John, when he was setting up that new table yesterday, he showed you this little thing. I don't know if you noticed, but it's is identity. And he set that to true. Okay? So that's number one. And what we're going to do is we're going to save that. And you can see what it did was down here, it went by really, really fast, but it did a restructure. And why did it do a restructure? Basically, all it wanted to do was figure out, okay, you had a counter in there. It's called customer number. Where'd you leave off? Because for the identity column for SQL, you need to tell it start here, because you don't want it starting at 1. So it basically goes through and it looks at all your data and says, you left off at 100, I'll set it to 101, and we'll go from there. So it did that. So now what I can do is I can go into this order sys table, and just to make sure that I'm not fooling anybody, I can go to that customer number and delete that column, save that table. Now, I should be able to compile this and run it. Oh, wait a minute, what happened? I forgot to take it out of my data dictionary. So, of course, I don't like data dictionaries in code. I'm not a coder, so I'm just going to go back to here. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to say, nope, I don't do that anymore. And I will save that, compile. And so now I've gotten rid of that. So I could do the next two and get rid of that whole thing. So that's like the first thing I did was just get rid of that one choke point. And that's just one simple example of the things that you're going to want to do once you're in SQL land. Other things you're going to want to do, client-only indexes, or even server indexes, and runtime indexes. Well, wait a minute. I'm going to talk about that next. These are not the indexes you're looking for. We're going to look at SQL filters. All right, if those of you that have been in SQL land, anybody using SQL filters here? Did they change your life? They changed your life. Because what you're doing is all those things, basically, what are you doing in really large data dictionary structures? You're basically filtering it down to just the stuff that you want constrained to what you're working on. And you're doing it all at the client. Sounds efficient, right? No, it's not. Not when you've got SQL Server sitting out there and you can say, I'm going to create the SQL filter, put it out at the server, or actually the data dictionary will tell the server what to do, and then all of a sudden the only thing that's coming back is the stuff that you know you wanted in the first place. It'll change your life. And it's pretty easy to do. And then the last thing that you do to kind of is take in the view. You know, one of the things about being in SQL land are views. Views are wonderful things. You know, we talk about how SQL Server does stuff and how DataFlex does stuff, and you're always trying to marry the two to get that best relationship going. Well, views are one of the ways that really does that just so beautifully, because you can go into SQL, you can define a view. Well, actually, you can do it wherever you want, but you can define a view, and you can tell it, I want you to join data together from different tables. The tables might be in different databases. They might be in different servers. SQL doesn't care. Get me the information I want. Bring it all together. I want you to do that all on the server so that I don't have to worry about how far it has to go to get to me. I want you to employ complex filters while you're doing that. So maybe you're not only getting different columns from different tables, you're saying already set up basically a kind of constraint mechanism that you want, and you want it to happen at the server side. I want you to limit the number of columns that are coming back to me. So even though I might have 47 fields in my customer file, I need 3 of them. Why don't I even worry about the other 44? I want it to be table structure independent. I don't care where that comes from. And think about this. You have these massive apps, and you've got 13 levels of parents and children and stuff like that, and you want this new guy to do a report. And so now to do a report, he has to jump through hoops to try. First thing you got to teach him is your data structure. No, first thing you got to do is create a view that simplifies it all down to a flat file and then say, go give me a report on that. And watch that guy be efficient in the first week of work instead of the second month of work. So that's the kind of stuff that you can do when you're in the SQL land. So that was just a little interlude to kind of say that's where I would have left off yesterday. So now back to indexes. What do we do with indexes? We're talking about what SQL has versus what DataFlex needs. And SQL has primary and foreign keys. Okay? They work great, they're awesome. What DataFlex needs are relationships. So we need to have some way to translate primary and foreign keys to DataFlex relationships. Well, we know how to do that. SQL has the ability to search. You will find that if you look at databases that are born and raised in the SQL world, you'll very rarely see, other than the primary key, which is always clustered and unique because that's the way primary keys work, other than the primary key index in SQL land, you're very going to rarely see unique indexes because they just kind of don't need them. You come across them now and then. A lot of times if you see a unique index, it's because one of us created it there because we knew that DataFlex wanted a unique index, so we created it that way so we didn't have to worry about it. It's not that SQL can't do them, it's just that it just doesn't normally do it by, it wasn't the way they were raised. So you've got unique indexes, so SQL doesn't need them, and we really need them. We want them all the time. And as a matter of fact, SQL doesn't really need indexes at all. It will find you what, and DataFlex needs indexes for everything. If you want to find something in DataFlex, you've got to have an index, and it damn well better be unique. So you can see a pattern here. So much of what's happening between SQL and us is blanked out on the screen. But if it was there, you would see that it was all based on indexes. So let's talk about indexes. Unlike the embedded database, SQL can and will order data for you, find it, get it, bring it back, as much or as little of an index as exists. And it will just do it smartly. So if you have an index that is not unique, let's say it is the customer name, and it's not unique, and you say, I want to find by customer name, but I really want it to be unique, it'll find as good a match as it can and then kind of say, here's what I got for you, see what you can do. So it will use as much as is there. And so we want to take better advantage of that. So we've changed things. It's not really a change. So much of what we've done with managed connections and connectivity in general in the product is just making what could already happen better, happen more consistently, happen throughout the tools, happen faster, better, everywhere. Oh yeah, that thing. So you got server-only index. You got server indexes. That means when it is an index that is fully described at the SQL server, and we know all about it. So what the INT file says and what the server says match exactly. If they're however many segments they are, there's a one-to-one correlation. Then you've got client-only. Client-only, the INT file says there's an index and it looks like this. That index may or may not exist on the server either in whole or in part. And then there is server-only, and that's an index that exists out on the server that might not be described to DataFlex at all. You say, well, what good is that? Well, we'll see what good that is in a second. So, and all of this, you've got server, client-only, server-only indexes. It's now super easy to manage in the studio. So let's take a look at that. Go back to the studio. Let's go to Chinook. Take a look at Chinook. So we're back to the Chinook database here. And one of the things you'll notice about Chinook, here is the Chinook database. Okay, when we deployed Chinook, we named it John Toohey. Kind of ran a little slow, but that's okay. But if you look at the track table, for instance, you can see it's got a bunch of indexes here. Remember I said it's got a PK index? Okay, that's a clustered index. That's unique. And then it's got all these other indexes, and you can see it's got one for all of the foreign keys, all of the relationships that it has. And you see those are non-unique and not clustered. And then it's got a track name, and it's non-unique and not clustered. So you can see that most of the indexes for this table are not unique, which makes them pretty much useless to DataFlex. I want unique. Now, what we did in the past was we said, well, let's just change those to unique. And we go into SQL Server Management Studio, and we change them to unique, and we hope we get away with it, but sometimes you can't do that. So what does all this look like in DataFlex now? So let's go back here and open up the track table. And aha, what do we have here? Look at all these indexes. I've got 5 indexes there, and 4 of them say server only, and an extra 4 say server only. Well, what does that mean? Well, when we connected to this, DataFlex, the connection wizard, did a smart thing. It looked at all the indexes that were there, and instead of saying, well, most of those aren't unique, I can't do anything with them, it went and married the 2 together. So index 1, you can see, is the track ID. It's the primary key. It's clustered, and it's a unique index. It's telling you that right here. And you can see it's a server index. Server means it's fully described to DataFlex, and it's fully described at the server. Let's look at what one of these guys down here looks like, the server only. Server only is album ID, all right, and it says it's non-unique. And you can see that the index name there. You remember that list of indexes that we looked at in SQL Management Studio? That was one of the indexes. That's a naming convention that when you start setting up primary and foreign keys, SQL Server likes to name things certain ways for the indexes and the keys and stuff like that. So that's what that is. So it's a non-unique index, so I can't do anything with it. But the connection wizard said, well, no, wait a minute. What you need is one of these guys. And so I'm going to create in the INT file, I'm not going to do anything at the server, I'm going to create this one, and I'm going to take that index name, and I'm going to append a _C for client side, and I'm going to make it client only. And what did it do to it added a second segment, and what did it use? It used the thing that would allow it to make it unique, recnum. No, not recnum, it used primary key. So it did that for every single index that was there that it found that was not unique. So it did an index 3 for the genre, it did an index 4 for media type, and it did an index 5 for name. Because I've got album ID, genre, media type, and name. And it did this all automatically. So now, when I look at this data, if I go and view the data, and I go over to media type, I can sort by it. Or I go over to genre, I can sort by it. And composer, oh, I can't sort by composer. Well, that sucks. Let me go back to this and say, I want to add a new index. Now, notice what it did. It said, wait a minute, you're about to make changes. I'm not sure exactly where you're going with this, and you might do something that'll mess up my display of my data, so I'm going to close that view so that it doesn't get confused so that you have to open it back up again. It's not a bad thing. It's just telling you, I'm not sure where you're going, so I'm going to take care of it and close that view up. And now I'm going to add this, and I'm going to say I want to add composer, and I want it to make it unique, of course. And I'm going to call this POSER _C, and I'm going to make this client only. And you notice it's a unique index now, and I'm going to over here, save that. Went out and did a restructure, didn't it? No, it didn't do a restructure. It updated the INT file. So now, if I go look at that INT file, I've got this guy. And it tells me all I need to know. Now, what's going to happen is, when DataFlex does its thing, it's going to send out those, find by index X's or find by customer or by track.composer, and that's going to get turned into an SQL statement. And SQL is going to go, I don't have an index that's composer and track ID, but I have an index that's composer. So I'm going to use that to be as fast as I can, get the set, then match the track ID, and I'm going to give you that. So now it's using as much of what SQL Server can do and then giving the DataFlex piece what it needs. And it's super easy. You just set it up, and you've got as many client-side indexes as you want to do, and it just works. So it's really easy to set it up, and it provides the basis for runtime temporary indexes. And you say to yourself, what are these runtime temporary indexes of which he speaks? These are the next thing that are going to change your life about living in SQL. Because now what you can do, all of the stuff that happened to make those client-only indexes work is basically saying, okay, think about what's in the INT file. The INT file, all it does is allows it that when DataFlex opens it up and it says, okay, there's an index, it's supposed to look like that, it just set up this thing in memory to know how to do that. So skip the part about putting it in the INT file and just tell it what to do in memory. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it to create an index. We're going to set some attributes for a number of segments, the fields involved with those segments, the segment direction, and then we're going to use that index as if it really existed. Because who cares if it exists or not? Remember, it's going to create an SQL statement that's going to say, I want you to select blah, 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 blah. And SQL, if it has an index that's close, it's going to use it. It's going to use it automatically. And if it doesn't, it's still going to find it for you anyway. Because SQL don't need no sticking indexes. And then when you're done, you delete it. So how does that look? It looks like this. You do a function, and we're like for this one right here, it would be city-state ordering. We want to, basically, you need a couple of things to use a runtime index. You need a handle to the table that you're going to be using. You need an integer for the index number, because remember, everything inside DataFlex is all numbers, and you want to be able to say, find by this number. You're going to take the customer that you want, get the handle to it. You're going to create the index for that index number. You're going to set attributes for number of segments 3. These are the segments I want. You're going to return that index number, all right? And then you go back. And then how do you use that thing? Well, you sit there and you say, I'm going to have a procedure that starts a report. I'm going to get that integer because that's going to be my order for my indexing. I'm going to use the temporary index. I set the ordering to that index number. I run my report. I delete the index, and I go home. And that's all you do. Slicker than owl poop on a doorknob. Think about that. So, so you've got all these wonderful things. You've got client-side index. First of all, you've got all that easy index management sitting there in the studio. And by the way, you could have done all kinds of things there. I could have created a new server index. And it would have gone out and done what it always does when you create something that is described on both sides. It'll do a restructure at the server and add that new index however you designed it. It'll be unique because, of course, you designed it as unique. All right? Or I could have modified indexes. Just because you only saw me create one client-only index doesn't mean that's all I could have done. You saw those server indexes there, server-only indexes. Who can tell me what would have happened if I had taken one of those server-only indexes and modified it in the studio? What would happen? It would do a restructure, and then what would the index be at the end of it? It'd be fully described on both sides, and it'd be a server index now. So it wouldn't be a server-only anymore, and it would have an index number. So you can actually turn server-only indexes into server indexes by messing with them. Do you want to do that? It's what you did before. You just didn't know you were doing it. So if you have control, and you could say, why would I ever want to take server-only indexes and change them to server indexes? What's the advantage of that? And here's the question you ask yourself. Am I doing DataFlexy things? What's a DataFlexy thing? DataFlexy thing is I'm going to find this invoice that consists of these line items which are connected to these inventory items, which is connected to this thing over here, and I want just that one. Okay, so, and then I want to take that one I want to find next. That's a DataFlexy thing. A not DataFlexy thing is I'm going to run a report that does a whole bunch of stuff. That's kind of more of an SQL thing. So if you're doing SQL-y things like running reports or filling selection lists, you don't necessarily need server indexes to do that because SQL will do it really efficiently anyway. But if you're doing those DataFlexy things, you might want to say, even though SQL Server can do everything I need, if it doesn't have the full indexes, if I'm going to be doing a lot of that, find next, find previous, those DataFlexy things, it might be worthwhile for me to give it a fully described, unique index to do that with, because then it's going to be even more efficient. And again, it all goes back to, do you have control over the database or not? So, and I said, because SQL will work even if it doesn't have any indexes at all. And you were thinking, yeah, right, that was a joke. Can't possibly work if it has not one index in the whole thing. No. What I did was I took the order entry 182 database, and I made a copy of it. Remember what we did yesterday was with scripts. We could bring up a script that would create the tables in the data, and we edited the name, and then it would create another version of it. So I did that, and I created an order entry no index database. And then I went into, I could have, if I knew anything about SQL, I could have written a script to drop all the indexes, but I don't know crap about that. So I just went into Server Management Studio, and I deleted every single index in that database. Primary key indexes, foreign key indexes, there's not an index left in it. And just to show you that I'm not lying, I go to here, I go to order entry no index, I go to tables, and you can open up any table you want, and there's not an index to be found. Nothing there. Even code mask and code type, no indexes, nothing. So I have a database out there that has the order entry system with no indexes whatsoever. So what can I do with that? Well, let's go and open up this guy. And I'm not going to try and open up tables because it's going to complain to me, but let's just compile and run this. Yeah, didn't like that. Oh, I deleted the order sys out of the wrong. See, that's what happens, John, when you do that. Didn't like that, but anyway. So now I'm finding records here, and you notice that I'm getting it out of this database, and what I did was I changed access miles so that I could see which database I was hooked up to. So this is order entry 182. All right, so I know that that's the table I'm getting it out of. So now, let me go back here and let me add a connection called order. And I want it to test that. And this time I'm going to hook it up to order entry no index. Oops, I keep forgetting to do that. All right, so now I've got, remember, we've got alternate connections here. One is looking at the unaltered, well, the slightly altered order entry database, and the other one is looking at order entry no index. So I'm going to make that my one, test it, save it, and now when I run order entry, and I'm now running against a database that has no indexes. And it's doing all the relationships, and it's finding all the stuff, and I could actually use this completely. I could create new orders, I could create new customers, I could delete stuff, I could do whatever I want. Because SQL can do, now, I'm not recommending that you do this. This is just to show you, kind of take a point and take it to its ultimate conclusion that you don't need indexes to do anything in SQL. So, before we finish up, I want to do a couple more things here. Because that's basically, it's not rocket science. You just have to understand the connection between what DataFlex needs, which it needs to know all the indexes that you want to actually use. It wants them to be unique, and it will do the best job it can. The SQL will do the best job it can of serving you that data. Whether it's efficient or not is really up to kind of what's out on the back end. All right, so you want to do it that way, and you could see that, and kind of we're tying into the managed connections here. So I've got my managed connections set up, and I've got my alternate connection, and I'm switching it. And then, somebody said, well, I forget, there was various questions along the way. I think I mentioned it in one of my things, and John may have mentioned in his, is that, you can switch these on the fly. How might that work? Well, I now have these alternate connections. So I've got, the one, and you saw me. I switched from one to the other. Let's just to make sure that we do that again, let's go back to this guy and enable him, save it, run. Yeah, I know, I forgot. I've got access miles order entry 182. I'm going to go back here, select this, enable him, save, run. I've got order entry no index. So I know I'm hooked up to the right database. But instead of doing all that, I can just do this instead. Here's a little view I have. And this view, I'm going to get the default database. Remember there was that one function, get and set default database? So I'm going to get it and see what it's set to. Can everybody see this? I can't make this. You can see what it's set to up here? It's set to order entry no index. So now I'm going to find a customer, and you can see it found the customer access miles order entry no index. Now I'm going to press this button over here and set it to order entry 182, and now I'm going to find a customer. Set it back, find a customer. Set it back, find a customer. So this is, and remember, I'm using the default database, so this needs to be same server, but different databases. So you can see how you can just, and so you say, okay, well, how's he doing that? Well, let's go take a real quick look at the code for that. And this is how I'm doing it. First of all, when you want to do something like this, you, this is the right one, you ask Martin, hey, Martin, how does this work? And then he says, okay, it works like this. And he writes these functions for you. He writes you get default database. And basically what it comes down to is that df underscore database underscore default underscore database. That's the thing. That's the attribute at the server, at the driver level that lets you do all this. Okay? And so he writes this code for you, and you say thank you. And then you say, okay, well, now I know what it's set to. How do I set it to something else? And he writes you this procedure to set the default database, and it does that. And if I knew anything about this code, I could explain what that's doing, but you know more about it than I do, and you can look at it and go, oh, that's what it's doing. And then you set up some buttons that basically, where are my buttons? Here they are, that do this. And the buttons do that. And that's how you switch it. And then you can even do something like this, because what happens if you don't want to actually go through the hassle of setting up things in the INI file? Well, John Toohey told you, if you listened, that the INI file is just a place to put it. You can do it all in code. So here's one that says set the default database to a new one. Let's compile that. Let's run it. Let's go over here. Do the view. And I have a button that says set default to hope this works, because I don't have it in my INI file. Database is a new one. Finds access miles a new one. Or no index. Or order entry 182. Or the new one. So as long as I know that that database is exactly the same, it's on the same server, and my access method is the same way, I don't even have to have it described anywhere else. Now, had it been a different access method, I would have had to do some more stuff to say, okay, well, I need this user, this encrypted password, things like that. But since I'm using trusted connections, and I knew that I had all the same users set up and everything in that a new one database, it just works. And that is, as they say, that. Thank you.